Jack Harper had never been one to believe in fate, destiny, or anything remotely mystical. If you'd asked him to define magic, he would have offered you a couple of sarcastic lines about stage tricks and David Copperfield. He was a man of logic, spreadsheets, and the unspoken social contract that office workers like him followed: show up, do your job, go home. Simple. Predictable. Safe. And then came the morning he found the KEY.IT wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to have any more problems with his morning routine. But then again, Jack had stopped believing that things could go according to plan a long time ago. This particular Wednesday was no different. His alarm clock had failed him again. This time, he blamed the weather app on his phone for falsely predicting a sunny day, which led him to neglect an umbrella. In retaliation, the skies chose to dump a monsoon on the city, soaking him from head to toe before he even reached the subway. And just to top it all off, Jack had somehow managed to lose his keys again. Sitting cross-legged on his couch, the clutter of the last few weeks scattered around him, Jack felt a familiar sense of dread. He had never been a neat freak, but the pile of empty pizza boxes, mismatched socks, and old coffee cups was beginning to feel like a personal insult. He was tired of being a mess. Literally. Physically. Mentally. As he searched under the couch cushions, cursing under his breath, he felt something odd. The sensation wasn't the usual scratchy, dirty thing you expect from digging into an old, forgotten mess of fabric and crumbs. This felt like wood. Or something hard, unnatural, yet warm to the touch. His hand brushed against it, and there, buried deep between the cushions, was a small wooden box. Great, Jack muttered to himself. A hidden treasure, right next to my lost dignity. The box was old, really old. It looked like something you might find in a dusty antique shop, wedged between glass jars and tarnished silverware. Intrigued, he fumbled with the lid and opened it, revealing keys.no, not just any keys. These were strange, ornate keys, each one decorated with intricate, mysterious symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. They looked like they had been crafted by a civilization long lost to time, keys that no one in modern society would ever use for anything practical. His curiosity piqued, Jack picked one of the keys up. It was heavy in his hand, made of gold that glimmered faintly despite the grime coating it. He marveled at the strange symbols etched into the surface. They seemed to swirl and move beneath his fingertips, as though the key were alive. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the cool metal beneath his skin, and then just as his thumb brushed over one of the symbols, a sudden pulse of heat shot up his arm. He yelped, dropping the key like it was a hot coal. But the strange thing was, the heat wasn't painful. It was comforting. Powerful. Something deep inside him had awakened. Jack blinked, and for a split second, he saw something: a flash of images, his apartment shaking, the air humming, and an overwhelming sense of connection to something far greater than himself. But just as quickly as it came, the vision was gone. He shook his head, feeling dazed. Okay, what the hell was that? Shaking it off, he shoved the box and its keys back into the couch and stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. He had work to do. Or rather, he had to get dressed for work, because he hadn't yet realized that he was still wearing the same old pajamas, mismatched socks, and, of course, the one thing every office worker fears, a Hawaiian shirt. Ah, perfect, he muttered sarcastically to his reflection. He wasn't in the mood for the usual office banter, the spreadsheet monotony, or the coffee breaks that were too short to even enjoy. But he was getting used to the idea that nothing about his day was going to be ordinary. And this was before the real chaos began. Work was a blur. The office was buzzing with the usual midweek energy, a strange cocktail of caffeine and low-level dread. Jack's co-worker, Lisa, who sat next to him, didn't even acknowledge his appearance. Not that he blamed her. It was impossible to unsee someone walking in wearing flip-flops and a shirt so garish it looked like it belonged on a beach in Hawaii. But Jack didn't mind. He was too distracted by the strange sensation still simmering in his fingertips from the key. His phone buzzed. It was an email from his boss, Trevor. Nothing special, just the usual "don't forget to get that report in by 3" message. But as Jack reached for his keyboard to type a quick response, the air around him grew strangely heavy. He felt the room growing hotter, and his fingers tingled as if they were being charged with electricity. He looked around at his co-workers, but no one seemed to notice the subtle change. Everyone was just staring at their screens, oblivious. Jack tried to ignore it, but the sensation only intensified. It was as though something ancient was stirring inside him, trying to break free. He clenched his fist. The key. The pulse. That flash of energy. Before he knew it, he was standing, a bead of sweat running down his neck. He walked toward the window, hoping to cool off, but as he passed by a nearby filing cabinet, the ground trembled. His heart skipped a beat. Was it an earthquake? No, it was something else, something more personal, more immediate. And then, in the next moment, the office lights flickered and a strange gust of wind rushed through the room, sending papers flying off desks and knocking over a few coffee cups. Jack froze, his breath catching in his throat. "Oh my God," he muttered under his breath. "What the hell is happening?" At that moment, his phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a work email. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you have the key, you are in danger. Do not trust anyone. Seek out Dr. Evelyn Drake. She will explain everything." The message vanished before he could even process it fully. His head was spinning. Had he gone mad? Was he hallucinating? The office was now in chaos, with papers scattered everywhere, and the strange wind continuing to blow through the room. And then, right in the middle of the mayhem, the door to his office opened. A tall, confident woman in her 40s stood in the doorway, her sharp eyes locking onto his immediately. She had a presence about her that made it impossible to ignore. She wore a dark green jacket with an intricate design of symbols stitched into the fabric, symbols that seemed to glow faintly, just like the ones on the key. "Jack Harper?" she asked, her voice calm but authoritative. He didn't answer immediately. His head was still swimming with confusion and disbelief, but then he remembered the message on his phone. Dr. Evelyn Drake. He nodded, though it felt like the only thing that made sense in a day that had otherwise made none. "Yes," Jack said, his voice shaky. "But I have no idea what's happening." "What is?" "We need to talk," she interrupted, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "Now. You have the key, and the key is going to change everything. For better or worse." Jack stared at Dr. Evelyn Drake, trying to wrap his mind around the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. The wind was still gusting around the office, and the scattered papers fluttered like startled birds, but Drake stood unaffected, calm, as if she were standing in the eye of a storm. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. "What is going on here? Why is this happening to me?" She stepped closer, her boots making a soft thud against the polished office floor, as if the world outside had no bearing on her presence. Her eyes locked onto his, dark and sharp, carrying a weight of knowledge far beyond anything Jack had ever known. "Because you have something powerful," she said, her voice low but urgent. "And right now, it's awakening things that shouldn't be." Jack felt a shiver run down his spine. He wanted to argue, to demand more answers, but the way Drake spoke was impossible to ignore. She wasn't here by accident. And what she said, the key awakening something, felt true. It was like the energy he'd felt earlier in the day had been just the beginning of something much bigger, something dangerous. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jack muttered, trying to shake off the confusion that clouded his thoughts. "I'm just an ordinary guy. I was late for work, and then I found these weird keys, and now everything's falling apart. What is all of this?" Drake's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of empathy in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. "You're not just an ordinary guy, Jack. Those keys are not just keys. They're ancient artifacts, guardians of the Earth's elemental forces. You've been chosen as their keeper." Jack opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't even fathom what she was saying. Elemental forces? Chosen keeper? His mind was running in circles. I know this sounds insane, Drake continued, stepping closer and lowering her voice. But the truth is, the key you found can awaken powers buried deep within the earth, forces that have been dormant for centuries. Fire, water, air, earth, the very elements themselves. And someone is hunting for it. Someone? Jack repeated, his heart pounding. What do you mean, someone's hunting for the key? What the hell do they want with it? She exhaled, clearly frustrated by the pace at which Jack was processing everything. There's a group, Jack. A very dangerous group. They've been searching for the key for years. They know its potential, and they believe that by controlling the elements, they can reshape the world to their will. This group, she paused, her eyes narrowing, they're led by a man named Reyes. Reyes? Jack echoed, still struggling to keep up. Who is he? Drake glanced at the office door, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. A former guardian, a traitor. He was once part of the order that protected the key, but he betrayed them. He wants to use the key to bring about an apocalyptic event, a convergence of the elements that will erase humanity's current civilization and start a new one under his rule. Jack's stomach lurched. This was no longer some weird coincidence. This was something real. Something dangerous, and he'll stop at nothing to get it, Drake finished, locking eyes with him. Which is why you need to come with me. Now. I can't, Jack said reflexively, stepping back. I can't just leave. I've got stuff to do. He gestured vaguely toward his cubicle, the filing cabinets, the coffee machine. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew how ridiculous they sounded. What was he even saying? He'd just been hit with a life-changing revelation, and he was worried about his desk job. His sense of normalcy was unraveling by the second. Drake's expression remained unreadable. You're already involved. Whether you like it or not. A loud crash interrupted their conversation. The office door flew open, and a man in a black suit stormed in, his eyes scanning the room with predatory intent. He had a cold, calculating look about him, someone who'd been hunting for something, someone who wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. Drake moved instinctively, standing between Jack and the newcomer. Reyes people, she muttered. They've found us. Jack's heart raced. This was it. He had no idea what to do, where to go, or how to handle what was happening. The man in the doorway took a step forward, and Jack could feel the air thicken, almost as if the room itself was responding to his presence. You're making a mistake, Drake said sharply. Leave now, or I'll make you regret it. The man didn't flinch. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. You're the one who's made a mistake, Drake. You've gone too far this time. Get out of here, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. You don't know what you're dealing with. Jack, meanwhile, was frozen in place. His thoughts were racing, and his instincts were screaming at him to run. But he couldn't move. The key, the one he had briefly held earlier, was still pulsing with strange energy somewhere in his mind. That force was alive inside him. It felt like the storm outside, like a power that was beyond his control. And right now, all he wanted was to understand it. He couldn't let this stranger, this threat, take it from him. The man smirked. It's too late for you both. You think you can stop the inevitable? The convergence will happen. It has already begun. Suddenly, the air grew heavier, and Jack felt a pressure building in his chest. His thoughts began to blur together, and a strange heat surged up from deep within him. His body tensed, his fingers clenched. What is this? Without warning, the man in front of him reached out, his hand crackling with an unseen energy. Jack instinctively stepped back, but not fast enough. The air around them sparked as if charged with static electricity. Jack's vision blurred, and in that moment, something inside him snapped. The office erupted into chaos. Papers flew everywhere. The lights flickered and went out. The room itself seemed to buckle under the weight of the energy pouring through Jack. He had no idea how it was happening, but it was. It was him. He could feel it, the elements, swirling within him, responding to his fear, to his need to protect himself. And they were angry. Before he could even understand what was happening, a blast of wind slammed into the man, throwing him backward. Jack watched in disbelief as the wind twisted and swirled around them like a living thing. The stranger tried to stand, but the force of the wind held him down, as if it were a physical weight. Drake took a step forward, her eyes wide with both awe and concern. "You've awakened it," she whispered, half to herself. Jack's breath came in quick, uneven gasps. He didn't know how he'd done that. He didn't know what was happening. The man in front of him struggled, but the wind seemed to tighten around him, pushing him further into the corner. "Stop," Jack said, his voice hoarse. He didn't know who he was commanding, himself or the wind, but the pressure started to ease. The wind died down, leaving an eerie calm in its wake. The man on the floor looked up, his eyes burning with fury. "You've made a grave mistake." Jack's heart raced as Drake pulled him back. "We need to leave. Now." Jack didn't argue. He didn't know how to fight this fight, but he knew one thing: he wasn't ready for whatever was coming. "Not yet, let's go," he whispered, his voice still shaky, but with the dawning realization that his ordinary life was gone. This was just the beginning. As they made their way toward the exit, Jack glanced back once more at the wreckage of his office. The door swung open, revealing the chaos of the building. People were running in every direction, terrified. But it was more than just fear, it was a deep, primal instinct to survive. Something was happening to the world, something much bigger than he could comprehend, and it all started with the key. Jack stumbled as he followed Drake down the narrow hallway, the distant hum of office equipment still lingering in the background. His mind was racing, a blur of confusion, disbelief, and a nagging feeling that he had just crossed some line he couldn't uncross. His entire reality had shifted in a matter of hours, and now it felt like the world around him was collapsing into something entirely different, something ancient, something beyond his control. "Where are we going?" he finally managed to ask, his voice hoarse. The pounding in his chest hadn't stopped since the strange wind had exploded out of him, and now it seemed to be rising again, as if responding to something deep inside. "We're going to get you somewhere safe," Drake said, not looking back. Her tone was calm, focused, but Jack could see the tension in her posture, the way she moved as if she were constantly expecting something to come charging after them. "We're not out of danger yet." They passed a few more rooms, but Jack couldn't focus on the details. His head was too full of questions. "That guy," he said, "the convergence had already started. What did he mean by that?" Drake shot him a sharp look, but kept moving. "The convergence is a catastrophic event," she said, her words measured but laced with urgency. "The elements themselves, fire, water, earth, and air, are supposed to be in balance. But the key you're holding is the catalyst. It can either keep the elements in check, or it can tear the world apart." Jack's stomach tightened. "And the guy Reyes, is he the one who wants to start the convergence?" "Reyes and his followers want to unleash it. They believe that if they can control the elements, they'll be able to reshape the world however they see fit. They've been searching for the key for years, but it's always been hidden, protected by the Guardians." "The Guardians?" Jack asked, his steps faltering for a moment. "The ancient order that created the key in the first place," Drake said, glancing back over her shoulder. "They were tasked with keeping the key safe, ensuring that no one could misuse its power. But Reyes betrayed them. He turned against everything they stood for." Jack couldn't process all of this at once. He had the key, the power to control the elements, and now this man named Reyes was hunting him. It was too much. Too fast. But somehow, he couldn't turn away. The key, the wind, the fire, it was all real. And now, it was inside him, connected to him in ways he didn't understand. They reached the elevator, and Drake pressed the button for the underground parking garage. "We need to get out of here now." As the doors slid open, the echo of footsteps behind them caught Jack's attention. He glanced over his shoulder just as a figure emerged from the stairwell. The man was tall, wearing a dark leather coat that swirled around his ankles. His eyes were cold, but there was something almost familiar about him, like Jack had seen him somewhere before. He couldn't place it. "Drake," the man said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "I see you're still running. Still hiding behind your precious key." Drake turned, her hand subtly shifting to her side, where Jack now noticed a small metallic object. A weapon, or something else? But there was no time to wonder. The man was stepping toward them, his presence commanding. Jack instinctively took a step back, the weight of the key in his pocket pulling him like a magnet. "Raise," Drake said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "I didn't expect to see you here. What is it you want? The key? You think I'll just hand it over to you?" Ray's lips curved into a humorless smile. "You know I'll take it from you eventually. The key is my birthright." "No," Drake snapped. "You threw that birthright away when you betrayed your brothers. When you chose to serve your own selfish desires over the balance of the earth." Ray's smile faded, but his gaze didn't lose its predatory gleam. "You misunderstand, Drake. I didn't betray anyone. I simply evolved. You see, the balance is nothing more than a cage. The Earth's power was meant to be free, to be used. And I will be the one to set it free." Jack's heart pounded harder in his chest, the heat building up in his fingertips again. He could feel it, the key. It was pulsing with something powerful, something ancient, responding to Ray's presence. He couldn't explain it, but he knew Ray's intentions were dangerous. The man wasn't just talking about controlling the elements, he was talking about destroying the world as Jack knew it and rebuilding it according to his own vision. Drake was ready to strike, but she hesitated, her eyes narrowing at Ray's. "You've already made your choice, Ray's. And now, you're going to pay the price for it." Without warning, Ray's hand shot out, and the air around them shimmered, a crackling force snapping like electricity. Jack barely had time to react before the floor beneath their feet trembled, a violent shake running through the building. Ray's wasn't using just his hands, he was manipulating the very fabric of the air around them. The wind picked up, stronger now, like a storm was brewing right in the heart of the parking garage. "Jack," Drake hissed. "Use it. The key. Now." Jack's mind scrambled to catch up. Use the key? He wasn't even sure what that meant. But then, the strange sensation inside him flared up again, the same pulse he had felt earlier, that power calling to him, pulling him forward. His fingers twitched, and the key in his pocket seemed to hum in response, as if urging him to act. Ray sneered, watching Jack intently. "You think you can control the elements? You're nothing but a pawn, just like the rest of them." Jack clenched his fist, and suddenly, the world seemed to slow down. The air around him thickened, crackling with tension. His vision sharpened. He didn't understand why or how, but he felt the power surge through him, like a flood breaking through a dam. It wasn't just the wind he was controlling now. It was all of it. The fire in his blood, the pressure of the earth beneath his feet, the moisture in the air, it all came together in an overwhelming torrent. His body instinctively moved, his hand lifting as if conducting an orchestra. The wind responded. It spiraled upward, a gust so powerful that it ripped through the concrete walls of the garage, sending debris flying. Jack felt his pulse quicken as the air pressed in around him, controlled but unpredictable. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. Ray's face twisted into a snarl, and his hand raised again, summoning a blast of force so intense it knocked Jack off his feet. The air screamed as it collided with the energy Jack was channeling, and the world around them seemed to collapse into chaos. Everything spun. Then, a voice broke through the storm. "Drake, Jack, focus," she shouted. "Focus on balance. Don't let it control you. You control it." Jack's breath was ragged as he fought to regain control. He felt the key in his chest, like it was a part of him now, a living thing connected to his heartbeat. The power, it wasn't just about controlling the wind, or the fire, or the earth. It was about balance. All the elements had to work together, had to be in harmony. He wasn't supposed to dominate them. He was supposed to work with them. Slowly, reluctantly, he eased the pressure on the wind, letting it subside. The fire that burned in his chest simmered down, and the earth beneath him settled, the tremors fading. But Ray's wasn't done. His eyes glowed with fury, and he surged forward, his hand crackling with lightning. Jack barely had time to react before the ground beneath his feet cracked open, and Ray sent a blast of fire shooting straight toward him. Jack's instincts took over. He raised his hand, feeling the surge of energy once again. This time, he wasn't just defending. He was redirecting. He could feel the fire, the heat, the energy. It was all a part of the same thing. With a forceful push, he sent the blast of flame back toward Ray's, the fire curling around him like a snake. Ray's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face as the flames engulfed him, but only for a moment. He fought against the fire with a burst of wind, knocking it back into the air. Jack didn't wait. He pushed harder, focusing, balancing the elements in his mind. It wasn't about overpowering his enemy. It was about outsmarting him. And right now, he had the advantage. With a deep breath, Jack focused on one final movement, a wave of air, steady and sharp, slicing through the flames, blowing them out before they could reach Ray's. The garage was quiet now, save for the ringing in Jack's ears. Ray staggered backward, his face flushed with anger. "You think you've won, Jack Harper? This is far from over." Jack's eyes narrowed, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. "Maybe not. But I'm not giving up the key." Ray's glared at him one last time, then, with a dark, empty look, disappeared into the shadows. Drake stepped forward, her hand on Jack's shoulder. "It's not over," she said quietly. "But for now, we've won this round." Jack nodded, still feeling the thrum of power in his veins. But he couldn't shake the feeling that Ray's warning had been more than just empty words. This was only the beginning.